And we're on Facebook now as well. Hi, everyone on Facebook. Great to be here. So up to 400 already on Zoom. So this is good. Give people a couple more minutes to join on. So what do you got in front of you tonight, Rupert, to keep you company?
Well, funny enough, I got a real mixture. So I got a cup of tea still, which I started on about an hour ago. It was my normal whiskey drinking time, and I had to say no, not yet. So there's a cup of tea there getting cold. Obviously the obligatory glass of water, and then I've got a little glass of Trademark X of the second edition, which Lovely. I'm looking forward to getting into.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there on that.
Oh, you got a little Christmas thing on it as well.
Excellent. I know, actually, it's I just noticed my 3-year-old put some sort of plaster on it, just to make it look even prettier, obviously.
That's good. And then obviously we've got the other 2 whiskies to get into a little bit later, which is a quick preview of that one and this one. Very different color whiskey.
Yeah, looking forward to trying them.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, welcome everyone. All the angels who've tuned in. Really looking forward to this session with Rupert Patrick, who is behind our very first whiskey that we launched on our site. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one for a while. And yeah, we met last year, I think it was. Rupert, Rowan Gormley, who original founder of Naked, now retired, introduced us. So looking forward to hearing more about that little part of the tale. And yeah, since we launched the whiskey, you know, I must confess, you know, as an Irishman, you know, a shameful admission is I'm not a huge whiskey man. But I'm doing my best, and I've certainly learned a lot from you, Rupert, and I love the whiskey you've done for us. I know there are a few people, plenty of angels tonight, who are very into their whiskey, and lots of people who've dialed in. So ask away your questions. No questions too stupid or basic, or too hard or challenging for Rupert either. So bring it on. And
well, I know there's some very clever whiskey people out there, and I've had a few tip-offs. So I reserve the right to phone a friend, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, this time, well, October last year we met properly. So Rowan put us in touch. Rowan obviously thinking, you know, Irish, must be into his whiskey. I kind of played dumb for a while, and went over to Scotland to meet Rupert, and figuring, you know, my lack of knowledge myself, I brought 3 of our biggest whiskey loving archangels with me. So Abby, Stephen, and Mark. So we all went over to meet you at Edinburgh Airport, drove up to Blair Athol distillery, had a tour around there, all met you, tasted the whiskies, learned your story, and the whole Naked James Eady collaboration was born. So tell us, if you're drinking whiskey tonight, let us know what you're having. I see lots of people are doing that already. Dominique, why don't we just do a quick poll there? Are people drinking whiskey? Are they on wine? Are you drinking something else? That's absolutely fine. But give us an idea of what you're up to. I've got my James Eady here myself, which I'm gonna pour for myself now.
Yeah. There we are. Oh, you can't see the levels of the screen printing, but it's that's what we're having. And actually, there's a little miniature bottle that we've just done, which is really quite cute as well.
Very good. And if you've got a question for Rupert, use the Q&A function down the bottom, or pop a question in the comments on Facebook, and we'll get to that. So the votes are in, and 60% of people are drinking whiskey.
Well
so
done.
We're in good company.
Yeah.
And the 18% of you drinking something else. Yeah, I'll leave you to it. So, okay, so let's get into this, Rupert. Tell us about your career, how you got started into whiskey before before James Eady came along.
Oh well, I was very lucky. When I was growing up, I was growing up with a father who knew a lot about wine. Indeed, his dad's one of the oldest masters of wine. He got his MW in the 1950s, so he's now 91 and he's still doing well. But so I grew up with this sort of appreciation of wine, fine and not so fine, and that led me to go and live in Bordeaux for a couple of years. I did a 1-year diploma in wine tasting at the Institute of Enology, And then I worked a year up in Château-Louden and a couple of other places, thinking that I was going into the wine trade. I mean, it just seemed, why not? I did a language degree, so I speak French, and it just seemed all so obvious, until the stupid little thing on my shoulder said, well, you might try something else before you do wine, or you might even not want to do wine. And I got lured into the city, into the stockbroking world for 4 or 5 years, at which point I thought, no, wine's better, so I'm going to go back to wine. And I missed. I got to whiskey. I answered an advert. I was just finishing an MBA. I did a 1-year MBA, and there was an advert in Harper's Wine and Spirit Gazette, which many of you will be familiar with. And it was only when I was sort of doing the address when it said Scotland, and I was born and brought up in the south, and suddenly I was on a plane to Edinburgh to go and meet the Russell family from what was then known as Peter Russell and Company, now MacLeod Distillers. And I got a job in the whiskey business in 1991, and that was the start of it. It was extraordinary.
Oh, okay. And I think you then had you had a great idea at some stage to do your own thing, and you came across our charismatic founder Rowan.
Well, it was
tell us about that encounter.
Quite extraordinary how life turns out sometimes. So I'd worked for this company, great whiskey company, MacLeod's, and they're doing really well now. 13 years in, I decided I needed to move to do something different. Because it's a family-owned business, and I wasn't family, and I learned that lesson. So I started networking, having been in the same place in a very, very, very good job with a great quality of life in Edinburgh. I started networking, and a friend of mine said, "You've got to go and meet Rowan Gormley." Of course, I didn't know who he was, but then I discovered he was the Virgin Wines star down in Norwich. I thought, right, I'm definitely going to go and see Rowan. I got on a plane, flew down there, and had this wonderful meeting. It was summer, and it was quite warm in this in that office, or it was like a converted barn, I think. Lots of people selling wine, and there was Rowan in his sort of board shorts, flip flops, and a flowery shirt. And we had a great chat, and he gave me the best advice, I think, the best career advice. He wasn't trying to. He just said, look, you've had 13 years in a really interesting small whiskey company. He said, you should do something entrepreneurial, but not yet. You need to go and learn how to do it in the big companies first. Go and learn how they do it, and make some mistakes, and then go and try something different. So I went away, and as it happened, that's what I did. But I just sort of didn't realize what I was doing. And then when I set up James Eady in 2016, 17, it was about a year and a half later, I was just going, I was thinking about past things, and I'd seen Rowan move to Naked and set up Naked, and I thought, well, there's definitely going to be a meeting here again. So I sent him an email. I just, I wasn't brave enough to call him up. I mean, he wasn't going to know who I was from Adam, but I sent him an email, and 2 days later there was a reply, and that's when he put us in touch. So, and I loved it. At the bottom, he said, "Rupert, great to hear from you. I do remember our meeting. Here's Eamon. He's the guy you need to talk to." And then, "Great timing, by the way!" exclamation mark. And that email was just dynamite. It was great. So what a small world. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Absolutely. And then 3,000 bottles sold on Naked later. Here we are tonight.
Yeah.
That's something else.
Yeah.
So then, who is James Eady, and how does that story come about?
Yeah, I'm sort of slightly ashamed to say it took me quite a long time in my career to really dig into James Eady's history. I mean, my mother's an Eady. My uncle Alistair Eady, also in the wine trade. I suppose he was the one that sort of initially flagged things up to me. He showed me some of the histories and things of James Eady, but I didn't pay much attention. You don't when you're sort of in a big organization, and you don't think you're ever going to revive a business. So it was in the background. It was really when I'd left Diageo and I was beginning to set up another business that I thought, well, I'd just have a look at the James Eady stuff and see if I can dig up a bit more history. And not really knowing where to start, I went back to Alistair and said, look, you've shown me a bit of stuff. Where'd you get it from? And he said, oh, up in the National Brewery Archives in Burton-on-Trent, where Eady's had a brewery for 150 years. And so I went to the archives and said, rather naively, have you got any Eady history stuff? And they had sort of this much of all the blending books, the ledgers, the accounts of minutes of meetings, and it was just wonderful. And it's amazing how you get excited in your family history. Once there's a meaning for the research, you then suddenly, it all falls into place and you want to put everybody into that part of the jigsaw. So James Eadie was my great-great-grandfather, of an absolute astonishing entrepreneur. Crikey. I mean, he left school at 14, left Blackford up in Perthshire, where he was born and brought up. He was about the 7th of 14 children, and he went down to England to work in his uncle's tea blending business. And from there, he went into malting barley, and from there into the brewery. And all the time, his family was still blending James Eadie's whiskey in Scotland. And then he, as he got bigger and bigger and the pub empire grew, he started selling the whiskey in the pubs and then bringing some barrels down to Burton. So, I mean, that's all. And there's so much detail, there's so much history that we've uncovered. And we keep doing so. I get, I've got a sort of, obviously a thing on eBay where I sort of get a notice of anything that's going, and we've picked up some fantastic things. And then people are coming out of the closet and sending us things. They're saying, oh, I picked up my great-great-uncle's will 10 days ago. Wonderful guy. He might be on the call, I don't know. He offered it to me. He said, look, I've got this. I've been sitting on it. I'm not an ED. This makes sense to come back to the family. So the detail in there to see what was going on in about, this was about 1920, late 20s. So no, it's been amazing. I'm so lucky to be able to do it.
And then what happened to that business that you needed reviving?
Well, so sadly, I mean, classic generation, family business, 3 generations, it got a lot harder. And I've seen through the details, you get diluted. There's lots of people to look after. My grandfather ended up with a small part of the business, and then it got tough in the 1930s. Crikey, it was tough business, and the survival of the fittest in the beer industry and consolidation. And Eadie sold out. They sold out to Bass at the time of Bass, which is growing and growing. And then so the Eadie's name disappeared by about the early 1950s. The last bottling of Eadie whiskey until we revived it was about 1948. We can't say exactly 48 or 47. And wonderfully, my grandfather, who was then the chairman of Wilson's Brewery up in Birmingham, in Manchester, he said to the people there, look, I want you to bottle enough whiskey to last me my lifetime. I love my own whiskey, obviously, and I want enough to see me out. And it did, and it saw out another generation, and I've got a couple of bottles of it, which is just awesome. So yeah, it's a sad thing. It dissipated. It's been dormant for 75 years, but so much of it was still breathing and still potentially alive. So I've done the easy bit. The hard work was done a long time ago. Yeah.
And then how did you go about then recreating that blend? That
well, as some people on the call will know, with great difficulty, because I mean, we've been in a phase of 10, 15 years of great time for Scotch whisky globally, with single malts growing really fast, 5 or 6% a year in all markets. Blends suffered a bit, but malt has taken up some of that slack. And so when you go around saying, look, I need these 12 single malts and these 2 grains to make the Eadie blend again, and I need, I wanted this sort of age and that age, and you have an idea of what you need. Most of them just said, no, you're kidding. Why would I sell you some Abelard or some Little Mill in one instance, Lagavulin, Talisker, Kalila. So it was I don't think I approached it right to begin with. It was difficult. So a lot of the doors were closed. It was about that time I started thinking, if I do get some of these whiskies, I'm going to need a really, really good master blender. So Norman Matheson starts coming into the picture. I spoke to Norman this morning, actually. He's on Grey Farm. Norman's sort of early 70s and still got one of the best nose in Scotland. So with Norman coming on, people saw I was taking this quite seriously. And then I sort of tapped on the doors again and said, well, look, I only need 4 or 5 casks of this and 4 or 5 of that. I mean, in total, that first bottling was about 85 casks, split amongst the 14 whiskies. So it wasn't huge. And I sort of said, I showed them designs of how the brand was going to be and talked about the bringing history back to life and the art of blending. And it got a bit easier, but it took a year, at least a year. And finding whiskies from Little Mill and Cambus was tough. I mean, they've been closed since 92 and 93. So that was the hardest thing and the most expensive thing. So yeah, it was tricky, but the industry is very it's a great industry. It's a very friendly industry, particularly on the production side. You know, anybody in Scotland in the bottling production, you know, we help each other because it's a massive industry. There's lots of companies, and we all trade with each other. So, you know, you couldn't have done it in lots of other industries. It would have been too competitive.
Yeah. And how did the early, so you bottled up the 14 different
yeah, so we got them together and then moved them to the blending plant where we were going to do the bottling. And I was getting, you know, this had already been a couple of years, let's say, since I'd left the corporate world, and, you know, money was running out, and, you know, it was like, God, I need to get on and sell some whiskey. And so Norman then said, right, we'll do the blending. We blended the malts, we blended the grains, then we blended them together. I'm going, right, Norman, we blended everything. You know, we can now bottle it. And he said, no. Now we've blended it all. We now put it back into casks to marry for another 6 months. And I'd heard about marrying, you know, when I was at McLeod's, and, you know, it's the old-fashioned way of doing things. You don't just do your blending and then bottle. You know, all these different components need to live together for a bit. And having seen the results of marrying and having compared them to what our blend was before, I'm absolutely converted. I mean, it's clearly the right thing to do. So we married the whiskey, and then we got it into bottle, and then it was a case of going out to sell. But luckily, I had a little bit of you know, some old networks, you know, in France and Denmark and Holland and Italy, and places that I could go and call on. So the first few sales were okay, but luckily the UK has been the market that's been the best for us. Which is, you know, if you tackle the home market, both, I mean, particularly in Scotland and in England, then if you get onto a good start there, it's great for your reputation. So we were very lucky, and we've been helped by a lot of people.
Right. Okay. So why don't we taste it together, Rupert? Just for the any of us that might have it.
I'm never going to ask, Eamon.
So yeah, I mean, should we first just go over the basics? How do you taste whiskey? How do you nose it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I won't get this all right, because you never do, and everybody's slightly different. But you'll notice I've got a nosing glass. This is actually called a Glencairn nosing glass, and it's just a beautiful shape. You can swirl the whiskey, you know, almost like a wine glass tulip shape. So, you know, it like wine. There's a lot of similarities. And then I suppose the first thing is, you know, do you drink it at the strength it is in the bottle, or do you add a bit of water? You know, this is at 45.6, which is the old 80 proof. That's the reason it's a slightly funny strength. So it's above the minimum of 40, which a lot of whiskies are bottled at. So there's a bit more alcohol there. But I think you can drink this neat. I think you can taste it neat. Splash of water brings out a lot more flavor if you want to. But I'd say probably try it neat and then add a bit of water to suit your taste. And when we're doing this sort of olfactory typing, this is how the blenders would do it. They'd probably add a touch. Actually, a lot of them won't even drink it. They'll nose it only, and that'll give them enough to do their notes and their analysis. So yeah, the other thing is when you pour a whiskey, and I'm guilty of not knowing this for a long time. Like a wine, it needs a bit of time in the glass to open up. I mean, I suppose it is fairly obvious, but you know, if the whiskey's been slightly chilled, or it's just, you know, been in that bottle a long time, it does a little bit better after a minute or two. And then obviously the color, like a wine, you look at the color of this, and it's a pretty light color, but it's been well bottled. There's, you know, it's been filtered very well, not chill filtered, which we'll come on to. So it's a beautiful light gold color, and you know, as almost as natural as you can be. So, you know, that's probably telling you a little bit about the age and whether it's been in sherry casks or bourbon casks. This is predominantly bourbon wood rather than sherry. And so yeah, that's what you're doing to begin with. And then I mean, different people have different ways of doing the nosing. Norman, he puts his nose in and does sort of 2 or 3 quite deep breaths, and does it that sort of way. I tend to do it more like a wine, I suppose. He's probably more correct than me, but the nose is giving away an awful lot. And I mean, what I get first is a sort of slightly sweet, floral, and a slightly fruity nose. And you can definitely get a little bit of vanilla that you get from the first fill bourbon casks. And we're using a mixture of refill and first fill. You don't want all first fill bourbon casks because then you'll be really sweet and vanilla-y. And then when you go a bit deeper into that nose, you know, you might pick up, I'm not saying you will, but you might pick up a sort of apple, sort of pear note. And then I get behind that a sort of, I'm going to say toffee, almost sort of caramel sweetness to it coming through. So in other words, there's a lot going on just on the nose, and it's beginning to tell you what sort of whiskey this is. But I don't know. I'd love to know from people on the call whether they get the peaty smokiness on the nose, because I don't really. I love peaty smoky whiskies, but I think the biggest surprise that Trademark X has to offer is that when you taste it, you get the smoke and the peat, whereas on the nose it's pretty absent. It's amazing to see that actually. I think our rating is 90% at the moment. Normally a whiskey that is a little bit peaty and smoky would have, you know, more naysayers than that, because, you know, many people don't like peat and smoke at all, and I totally get that. But maybe because it's not overt on the nose, it's only on the palate, that it doesn't put people off. So that's the first approach. And then by now your mouth is beginning to go, right, give me some of this. I want to taste it. You should be salivating a little bit.
When we met you, Rupert, I was driving the bus for everyone, so I only got this far. So I'm looking forward to finally drinking this with you.
Oh, well, thanks a lot. You mean you haven't tasted it in the last year? The thing that you said to me, Eamon, when we first met in the office in London, you completely disarmed me, because we went in to do some tasting, and you said, right, Rupert, I'm just going to tell you, you're starting from scratch here. I really know very little about whiskey. And I thought, oh, crikey, I haven't done this sort of tasting for a long time. Normally it's with experts. So, but it was actually very refreshing, because you approach it like anybody does, you know, from first base. So should we have a sip?
Yeah.
You probably, I don't know whether you saw that, I did a little bit of the aerating.
Yep.
Just breathing air through it. Even at 45.6%, you can still do that, and it accentuates that flavor. And this is the moment, about 3 or 4 seconds in, you get that smoky, peaty Isla flavor coming through, and that's coming principally. There's as I said, Talisker is a little bit oily, smoky, Lagavulin obviously, and Kalila. There's a higher proportion of Kalila in this blend than the other two, and that's what I put these. You know, it's now really happening for me. You know, back of the mouth down here, retronasal peat and smoke coming, but not just that. And this is where I think blending can really trump some other whiskies by giving you a layered structure and balance that gives you different flavors at different times, and if they're well done and well blended, they then mingle together. So you might be now getting a sort of certainly rich sort of creaminess and a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of slightly peppery. I get most of the sort of smokiness at the front and the peppery further back, and then the aftertaste, which is very long, gets for me to sort of back to the fruity notes of slightly pear, slightly apricot, and then slightly dries off at the end. But so you had a real sort of, it's like a sort of elevator going up through different flavor levels. And for some people, and maybe the 10% who wouldn't try it again, maybe that peaty smoky one is just a bit too much. But it's yeah. So there we are. I've drunk it at 45.6. I'm just feeling, that was rich, intense, complex. And it's tough to say. If I'd done that blindfold and I'd never known about James Eadie's whiskey, and somebody said, what is that whiskey? I mean, I think I would have been a bit flummoxed, because probably in your head, you're going, oh, this is a great single malt, because a lot of us were drinking more single malts than blends. But then you would go, oh, well, hang on, it's not an out and out Islay whiskey. It's not an out and out Speyside. It's got a bit of rich Highland whiskies. It's I'm probably not meant to mention other whiskey names, but going back 20 years, I'd always have said that Highland Park was one of my favorites, because that was always slightly smoky peaty, but not too much. It was beautifully balanced. So there's a lot going on in that blend that hopefully is very good.
Yeah. And where do you stand? Where do you stand then on the kind of blend versus single malt debate? And blends maybe have a bit of a rep.
Flavor. It just comes down to how well made is the whiskey, what's the flavor. I mean, I'd almost like to drink whiskies without knowing whether it's a blend or a malt, or a blended malt even, or a grain. I mean, we bottled a 24-year-old grain whiskey last year for a customer. It had been in a sherry butt, and it was beautiful, absolutely stunning. And it was retailing at £90. I mean, it was just awesome. So it's for me, it's not about what the label says. You shut your eyes and drink it and think, what does this tell me? But it is inevitable that an awful lot of us, and a lot of the chat in Whisky Magazine, on Whisky blog sites, has been about single malt. Because malts are getting better and better, and there's so many wonderful malt bottlings, partly from the big distillers who own them, but also from the independent bottlers. There's just some fabulous whiskey out there, and the sort of blends have been a bit slow to realize that we've got to market ourselves better. We've got to get that attention back again, and really do good blending, because some of the biggest brands in the world are the most brilliant 12-year-old blends, for example. No harm saying Shiver's 12-year-old Johnny Walker Black Label. These are awesome whiskies. They're really good, and we need to shout about them a bit more. So it's flavor driven for me. It's not about age statements, really. It's not about anything else other than trying to create a beautiful whiskey that is ready to drink, and obviously it will last in a bottle as long as you want it to, because it's not going to go off.
And when it comes to like water, ice, where do you neat?
So growing up with that,
personally,
growing up with a father in the wine trade, master wine. Actually, he did work in whiskey. He worked, obviously they had J&B, and he the ritual at home. We all have these growing up memories from sort of 6-7 years on. Dad was back home from work. He commuted into London, born and brought up in Ireland, but worked in London. And he'd come home, and his first drink was a J&B on the rocks. 4 or 5 lumps of ice and water up to the top, a long drink. I suppose you call it a highball nowadays, but it was probably just a normal measure, maybe 2, and very diluted. And that was it. And he'd drink whiskey before dinner, and then wine, and nothing afterwards. He'd never go back to whiskey. And even to today, he still will not drink a single malt. He's just not interested. He drinks whiskey exactly as he always did. And I mean, who am I to say that's not the right way? Norman Matheson, who I respect hugely, he drinks whiskey with 1 lump of ice in it. He doesn't dilute it with water, just puts a lump of ice in and just lets it, dissolve a little bit. And that's absolutely great. And I absolutely concur with people who say, just drink it neat as it is first. If that's too strong for you, then dilute it down a bit. But do so carefully, because, oh gosh, I think in about 94, 95, I did a Macallan tasting. And somebody said, Macallan of all malt whiskies, and obviously was a leader back then as well, it really changes. If you put too much water in, you kill it. So literally, we were doing it with a pipette. And, each drop was changing it already. So no, there's no wrong way. You just have to do what you think is right. And my crikey, it makes a good cocktail. I mean, try a whiskey sour with a smoky Kalila, fabulous. So many ways, and thank heavens, because of the 100 million cases of whiskey sold, an awful lot of it's drunk as a mixer in with Coke or lemonade or ginger ale, and that's great. That's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, totally. Well, last question before we get to the people. How has this year been for you with COVID and kind of business changes as a result?
Yeah, pretty scary, I think, is the answer. We, as of March, obviously we couldn't go, none of us could go to the office. I was it was a really odd time to buy a business. I was sort of the main shareholder, but I wanted to buy James Eady out completely, and we did that in lockdown in May. And I was going, I think I might be about to be very stupid. But luckily, whiskey sales, especially if you've not been exposed to the duty-free markets, And if you've not been heavily reliant on the on-trade, on the restaurants and bars, then actually you've done pretty well, because I think people have been looking for unusual whiskies, maybe some of the smaller bottlings, the rarer whiskies, the independent bottlers like us, and the online whiskey shops, Royal Mile Whiskies, Master of Malts, lots of them. There's so hard to find whiskies. They've done really well. Their problem, a little bit like Naked, was crikey, we've got a lot of business, and we've got to step up. So no, we've been really lucky, and yeah, we're just looking forward to 2021, thinking, we've got some exciting plans. And being a very small whiskey business, really, it's about continuing to build your stocks so that you can plan further and further ahead. I mean, in our planning, we're thinking 10, 20 years down the line. I mean, I really kid you not. You've got to think that far ahead, because you've got to, I can't rely on buying from the market all the time. I've got to build up stocks myself, and then you can start playing around. And one of the things we're going to talk about later is the, that possibly doing that sherry cask finish. That'll take 7 or 8 months. So got to find the right whiskey, and then get the right casks, and plan ahead. So yeah, no, we've been really lucky, and I totally I really recognize that. But from a people point of view, I mean, this tiny business, it's all about the guys working in it, and both Leon and Hugh, my 2 wonderful members of staff, they've got through COVID. They're in London. They've got through this with a sense of humor. Hugh particularly hates not getting out and doing whiskey talk and sales and whiskey fairs. He's such a natural salesman, and he's stuck at home. So I'll wait to get him back out again. He'll enjoy that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's jump into a few questions. Good one here from Helen. Any advice for a whiskey newbie?
Oh yeah, it's sort of fun. Over the weekend we had a little sort of mini whiskey fair, and a couple of people said, "Look, I've never tried it." So I was sort of steering them towards a sort of, obviously Trademark expert. I mean, a more approachable style of whiskey. But actually, somebody tried the Kalila I had and just said, "Oh, that's the one for me." And so she went in straight to the deep end on, really. So I don't know. I think just experiment and try, and don't be frightened to start with it. Quite diluted. Don't be frightened to start with it with a mixer. It's such a it's a complicated, whiskey is complicated. We get into telling what a blend is and how it's made, and the different things with maize and wheat and barley. You can be kerfuddled quite easily. So I think just have a go, and then start to do a little bit of research and have a look, and like you do with the wine, I suppose, see what sort of grape variety you like. So yeah, just get stuck in, jump in with both feet.
Great. Malcolm asks, "Hey Rupert, do you prefer non-chill or chill blending?" Does he mean filtering?
Chill filtering. Yeah, great question. It's a hard one. Most of the independent bottlers don't chill filter. There's an argument that says chill filtration, which is basically taking whiskey down to about, well, depending on the company, -2, -3, sometimes down to -5. It takes out some fatty esters. But most people would say those fatty esters don't actually add any flavor or taste. All they do potentially is make the whiskey go cloudy if it gets very low temperature. So if you left it out in your garage, or you had a cold place and it went to near freezing, it could throw a haze. And a lot of people go, "Oh, the whiskey's badly made." It's not badly made. It's just the fatty esters showing a bit of haze. We don't chill filter any of our whiskies, because I don't think Trademark X would have been chill filtered back in the day. We try and stay as true to what James Eady did 150 years ago as possible. So we don't chill filter, but I don't think it has a massive difference.
Great. Jeff Thompson asks, "What gives whiskey its peat flavor?"
Yeah, again, great question. Now, it's easy to say, well, if they're made on Islay or Skye, they're going to be peaty, but you've got a whiskey like Ardmore in the Highlands, just on the border of Highlands and Speyside, that is quite peaty. It's essentially what fuel you burn in the malting process. So, in places where there weren't a lot of trees, there wasn't a lot of wood, you burn peat. If you didn't have access to coal, you burn peat. And peat, when you burn it, as we all know, it gives off a really good smoke. So the smoke affected the malted barley, and that carried all the way through the the fermentation and the distillation. It's astonishing that it does. But if you've been to an Islay distillery, for example, or Ardmore, or many others actually, you are really sort of knocked sideways by the peat reek. And very often it's the real the peatiness comes not from a really hot peat smoke, but from a really cold, and it's almost like a mouldering bonfire that's been going for sort of 3 days in the garden. It's a bit damp, and you see a lot of smoke, but there's not a lot of heat, and that's what a lot of the distilleries want. So it comes from the fuel that they use.
Okay, thanks. James Schultz, where do you keep your casks and do your blending?
So we buy the casks from a huge variety of distillers, and if we don't want to use them yet, we'll store them with the distillers until such a time we want to bring them to the blending hall, or if it's not being blended, if it's a single malt, to where they're going to be bottled. So I mean, moving casks around Scotland is an expensive business, as you can imagine. So you try and move, I don't know, 30 or 40 casks at a time. If you're just moving one, you know, you're going to be stitched up. So we did the blending in Livingston, just between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and then we do the single malt in another location, which is more sort of boutique, you know, one-off bottlings, and they do the cask finishing there, and they can store some cask for us. Once we've re-racked it into a sherry cask, then we will leave it there at the bottling plant rather than moving it back anywhere. So we've got a bit of a sort of heat map all over Scotland of casks. And the big companies, crikey, they've got casks stored in hundreds of warehouses all over Scotland. Partly because from an insurance point of view, you don't want, you know, all your stock in one warehouse. So, you know, if it goes up on fire, you've lost everything. So there's a real there's one person I'm thinking of on this call who masterminded a lot of stocks for one of the big whiskey companies, and he'd have a much better answer than me. But yeah, you want to de-risk your plan, and also you want to have stocks with lots of the other distillers.
Okay, Emma Paxton, a few other people have asked. Love Trademark X. Do you have any suggestions for food that would go well with it?
Oh, yeah. Now the really honest answer is, you know, you've got to drink wine with food. But if you're not drinking wine, I think because of the slight smoky peatiness, I mean, an oyster, smoked salmon, you know, a smoky fish, a kipper. I'm not saying you're drinking them at breakfast time, by the way. But yeah, a sort of shellfish seafood, I think, is great. But then you could go this route with a nice cheese, as long as it's not overpowering. You can have whiskey with a cheese. In fact, I've done that with Trademark X. So I've been to whiskey dinners where they don't serve wine and it's all whiskey, and frankly, it's a bit boring. You know, you probably end up drinking too much whiskey as well, which is obviously not good.
Okay, Linda Williamson, how important is the water used in the manufacturing of whiskey?
Oh, again, you've lots of answers to this one. If you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I would have said really important. You've got to have good, pure water. But it's, you know, when you've distilled twice and you've then condensed the whiskey and you've got it back again, you know, an awful lot of, you need very pure water. It's important to understand why distilleries are by rivers. It's not because of the quality of the water, partly that, but it's also because of the quantity of it. You know, distilleries use a hell of a lot of water for the cooling processes to condense the whiskey, and you know you need water. So those that are by rivers need a lock or a reservoir at the top of the hill to feed that water. Some distilleries have to shut down in the middle of summer if they run out of water. So it's important, but I think much more important now is the focus really is on your barley, on your distilling process and how you distill. You know, whether you're using worm tubs or not, which tend to create a richer, meatier whiskey, and then and what casks you put it into, and how you mature with your whiskey. So I think the wood, it plays a massive role. Your type of distillery, how quickly you distill, what your fermenting is like, all that plays a role. The water, in my view, slightly less so.
Okay, great. Question over from Facebook from Dale. A friend of mine has just started making his own whiskey. He also produces a good beer. Are there any similarities between brewing beer and whiskey?
Yeah, because it starts out as beer pretty much. Maybe that's why, you know, Edie's were, you know, they were doing both. They did beer. They had a brewery up on the site where Tullabarden Distillery now is. There were two little breweries there, family owned. So yeah, there's, you know, God, I remember making beer when I was about 16, and it goes into the airing cupboard for some reason, doesn't it? With a sort of cloth over it. It's not very good. But yeah, no, the art of brewing, crikey, very, very big art. And you know, you can make really, really strong flavored beers just as you can with whiskey. So yeah, I think they go together very well.
Okay, great. Will we talk about future projects for Whiskey at Naked, maybe?
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to. So it's been great to have sort of quite a lot of chat on Naked. There's a whiskey group and there's other groups that are interested. So over the last sort of 3-6 months, I've been listening to feedback and hearing what's going on, and I think it makes sense to increase the sort of the offer and what we can offer Angels. So we were thinking, do we do another blend, or do we do a finish on a blend, or do we do single malts? And I think, you know, when we looked at it closely, it was, well, let's do a limited edition, one-off, you know, single malt for Naked, and that's the sort of starting point. But then, of course, there's so many different types and there's so many different opportunities. So we look back at what we've done over the last couple of years for some of our sort of specialist customers around the world, and you know, you can go classic Speyside, beautiful, you know, light, fruity, you know, floral driven whiskey. Many examples, I won't mention some. Or you could go peaty, smoky. You know, we could bottle a Kalila or something, or we could do a finish. And our finishes have been really popular. They sell out, you know, just instantaneously. And we've got a little bit of experience in this now. So what we're suggesting is we look at a cask finish, possibly an Oloroso or a PX, Pedro Jimenez cask finish whiskey that we would do absolutely for Naked. You know, this would be nobody's done it before. It'll be our sort of project together. We don't know how long it'll need in the cask. We'll have to taste that and go along. So that's one option, and that's this. This is an example of one that we did. So it wouldn't necessarily be exactly like that, but you're going to pick up a lot of really lovely sherry color and flavor. Or the other one that we might have a little look at is, you know, this is a Glen Elgin. This is a 9-year-old Glen Elgin. What we call this is a small batch. So we bottled 3 or 4 casks together, and we used a mix of first fill bourbon casks and refill. So it's quite light because the refill casks tend not to give too much color, but it's really lovely flavor, and it's real. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a beginner's single malt. It's what a lot of people drink all the time. So you know, I thought it'd be really interesting just to see and get feedback from this Zoom call to see which sort of direction we might go, or maybe we have to do both.
Absolutely.
Who knows? So yeah. Have you had a taste?
I poured them into my glasses here. So what if you do the same, and we will get to a few more questions, guys, don't worry. If you've got maybe specific questions, you know, about a whiskey you bought, or you know, asking, you know, for presents or whatever, maybe Rupert, would you be up for maybe answering some of those more individual questions on your wall if people get in touch in the morning? If we don't get to everything now, I'll do my best to get through as many of them as possible. Yeah, so if we try the
well, let's go for the Glen Elgin first, because the Dal Ewan is a lot richer. So we'll start with that. So same thing, you know, lovely color, light, fresh, and these are at 46. So we tend to bottle the small batches at 46. So we've reduced it you know, a fair bit, probably from the cask strengths of between 50 and 60. I think 46 is a really nice strength. It's also great if you're not chill filtering. The higher the alcohol strength, the less chance there is of it throwing a haze when it's cold. So it's 46 is great. You get more bang for your buck. And that one's just got I think it's an astonishing nose. It's I was doing this again today. We all write tasting notes, and then you look at it again. You sort of read different stuff. But there's a sort of elderflower, lychee, floral note. I mean, at one point I was thinking almost sort of that Knickerbocker Glory, that sort of banana and cream thing. And then I was sort of leaning more towards lemon. But you get where I'm at. This is not, you know, raisin sultanas. This is not Christmas cake. This is light, fresh, and a little bit of peach, and peach lychee, this sort of area. So that's what I get on the nose. And then the palate, you're beating me to it, Eamon. You're on the palate already. Maybe you say what the palate tastes like.
Resist.
Salty straight away. Sort of salty almonds. Again, that you've got the nose is didn't lie to you. It's quite floral, but there's also a sort of rich coffee bean, sort of ground roasted coffee coming through. And that I know it might sound really silly, but remember custard creams? It's so really mouth-filling for a whiskey that looks light in color and you think light in flavor. It's got an awful lot going on, and a bit now. I'm getting a bit of lime coming through off the back, off the nose.
Yeah, I'm getting, like, if you like a kind of elegant Chardonnay, like Chablis, if you're like on kind of wine terms, Burgundy, it's that kind of creamy, buttery, but quite tropical, kind of green, limey type flavor. Very intense, very, it's very nice.
Really delicate, and at 46%, neither of us put water in it. Totally drinkable. There's none of that alcohol burn. There's nothing harsh about it. It's and this one is 9 years old, so it's it's not a 16-year-old whiskey. It's personally, I think if it's been in good casks, it's been nice and matured from 6 years onwards, you're getting to some quite nice whiskies. But for personally, sort of 8, 9, 10 to 12-year-old is really probably the sweet spot.
What sort of price roughly, Rupert, would we be looking at for this whiskey?
That one, I'm pretty sure we can get that to somewhere in the mid-30s. So for a special one-off bottling, I don't know how many we would do. Limited number of limited edition, every bottle numbered. It would be to get that in the mid-30s would be great.
Okay.
And I haven't mentioned it before, but having been in the sort of small whiskey company a long time ago, and then having come back to a small whiskey company, I just it is all about delivering value for money. And yes, people are paying 60, 70, 80 pounds for a lot of whiskies nowadays. And that's great, but really at these sort of levels, 30, 40 quid is, you should get great whiskey at that sort of price. When we come on to talk about the next one, it's going to be cask strength. It's going to have a finish. It's it is a more detailed, complex whiskey to make, and more money goes into making it. So that's going to go up to more the 50, 60 pound level. But you should be able to do great whiskies at 25 pounds to 35 pounds. So that's where we would aim for.
Okay, great.
We
then on the finish, then
the finish of the Glenelgin.
Oh no, the next.
Oh, okay, the next one. So this is a distillery called Dalhuan, which is again right in the middle of Speyside. It's not a famous distillery. It's a Diageo whiskey. It's a great blending whiskey. I don't think it's open to visitors, so you can't even go inside it. But it's I've seen it from the outside. It doesn't have worm tubs, but it produces a very meaty spirit. It uses a lot of stainless steel instead of copper in its equipment, so it doesn't pick up. The more copper you have, the lighter the spirit's going to be. So Dalhuan particularly want to try and keep it meaty, and it's a great blending whiskey. Norman thinks it's a wonderful blending whiskey, but you can find it. I think you can find it in the Diageo Flora and Fauna series, and you find it with a few independent bottlers. And we've got a few casks, and because of the sort of heavier nature of Dalhuan, it lends itself well to a finish in a sherry cask. It's not going to be overpowered. I think the great thing when you're doing cask finishing is don't completely lose the distillery character. You want to know where it's from. You want to have that feeling that this was barley once upon a time. So, but as soon as you put your nose in there, it's just completely different. And this is the right time of year for this sort of whiskey. It's Christmas pudding. It's soaked sultanas and raisins. There's a little bit, I mean, I sort of get a bit of licorice, a little bit of sort of Kendal mint cake coming through. And also, yeah, also that sort of coffee flavor, that sort of, which is what you'd expect for something that's been in an Oloroso sherry cask. And a quick word about the sherry casks, because a lot of people go, well, hang on, that's a huge color for 7 months in a sherry cask. If you imagine the sherry casks have been emptied in Spain, they're shipped over to Scotland, and if you get that process really neat and tight, you can have whiskey being put back into that cask within probably 4 or 5 days. If you left it a month or two, that cask is beginning to dry out. If you left it longer than that, it can be very dried out, and then you don't get such an impact. Our source of sherry casks is fantastic. We've been very lucky. We're just developing another route as well, and we get the whiskey into the sherry cask very quickly. And I think that's, there's a lot of sherry still in the wood, and then it mixes with the whiskey, and you can get, not all of them, some of them have been a bit lighter than that, but you can get these remarkable colors on a whiskey quite quickly. But again, as I said before, it's not all about the color. It's what's the impact on the nose, and it's a very attractive nose. It's almost like a sort of dessert wine, like a Riesling or something. And then the palate will be, I think, quite similar. And this is 51%, and we haven't diluted that. If I was drinking that, on a Saturday night and watching a film or something, I would add a splash or two of water. I mean, 45% is sort of my level, but I, absolutely, a lot of people won't do, because although it's 51% alcohol, it's had that sweetness, that the sort of softening of the sherry cask. So now on your palate, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I'm getting a bit of sort of bitter orange, a bit of sort of marmalade, a little bit of chocolate. And funny enough, a little bit woody and a tiny bit sort of smoky at the back there. I don't know where that's coming from. And it's very long. It's sort of luscious, and it's coating the mouth with all that flavor. And then the finish for me is then now a little bit spicy, peppery, and dare I say it, a sort of dark maraschino type cherry. Not a dark cherry, a maraschino cherry. Sort of, if you've had a perfect Manhattan or something, and you've had that cherry, and then you just pop it in your mouth at the end. Really good. So yeah, again, very complex whiskey. Lots going on in there. And got that in front of the fire on a cold night, just absolutely lovely.
The length is just incredible. It keeps going and keeps evolving.
Yeah,
it's so intense.
Yeah. So two very different. I wish everybody had a glass in front of them, then we could get the feedback. But I guess the question is, which would be more popular?
And price point for that one, Rupert?
So we're going to target 55. We'd love to get that to 55, and then that's, I hope that would be outstanding value for. I mean, this sort of whiskey sells at more than that. They're more like 60, 65 with our other specials. But then we're doing it in smaller numbers, so it would be, it would be a good discount. And these things then get quite collectible. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but with most of the James Eady bottlings, we've got people who now, they'll buy 2 bottles, they'll keep one, and they'll drink the other, and who knows. I don't really want that to become the only way that people get into whiskey, because it's all about drinking it. But when they are such limited things, and very often you're doing a cask or 2 casks at a time, it's like, well, if you really like it, you don't want it to go away, so keep a bottle.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear from the people. If Angels will be up for either of these projects, we'll stick up a vote and see what people think.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, while we're waiting, let's get through a few more questions. Andy asks, as a subconscious single malt snob, he hasn't found a blend yet he likes. How would the TMX differ to some of the mainstream blends? And if it helps, he's a fan of Islands, particularly Islay.
Okay. Oh gosh, it's different. I mean, a lot of the, oh crikey, some people won't like this, but a lot of the really big blends have taken out a lot of their Isla sort of element and content because they're selling a single malt so well. And why would you put it in a blend if you can get a bigger margin as a single peaty whiskey? So you have seen a change in some of the standard blends, but then you can go to some wonderful blends that do still keep a little bit of the peatiness in them, and they're great. I'm going to mention a very small blend, Isla Mist. I mean, it's the 12-year-old version is absolutely fantastic. So if there's a good mix of whiskies, and it's been well blended and hopefully married, as Trademark X has been, then it stands up. And we've got 60% grain whiskey, 40% malt, which is it's a good percentage of malt. And if it's blended right, you're not really thinking, well, there's grain and malt. It's just a great all-round drink. So there are some really great blends, but you do have to look around. You have to be a bit lucky sometimes.
Look at that. So the classic Speyside, 39%, that gets the nod, followed by, let's just do both, and then the sherry finish in third place. So that's some interesting market research right there.
That's great. That's really interesting. Yeah. And when we talk about the Speyside, Glen Elgin is lovely. We could do Glen Elgin. We could do another. We got access probably to 5 or 6 different ones that we can do. So we'd taste them, we'd get the car samples, and then we'd agree what is right. But that's sort of the sort of categories exactly right there. The characteristics of that whiskey are what we would suggest doing. A bourbon cask, not a sherry one, just basically delivering classic Speyside.
Okay, great. What else have we got here? Sean, do you ever go to whiskey festival tastings?
Yeah, I'm missing them, Sean. I really am. Normally this time of year for 2 months, Leon, Hugh, and I, we probably cover 2 a week. We split our forces, and literally, you get the smaller the whiskey festival, the better. The last one I think I did. I did one in Birmingham. The one before that was in Bristol, under the Arches, where I think there's a nightclub, and a whiskey company took it over, and they had all the independent bottlers. And I was there for 2 days. I talked from 10 in the morning till 6 at night. Poured lots of whiskies, and it was just fantastic because you just get all the feedback you want. These are, a lot of them are real whiskey fans, experts, and they follow you. And we just look at such great feedback, and there's nothing better than producing a great whiskey and then having someone tell you straight in front of you, this is great. And if they don't like it as well, we take that on board too. So yeah, I love whiskey fairs. Tend to enjoy the smaller ones rather than the bigger ones.
Okay, great. Johnny Devine, good question here. Rupert, what percentage level do you think neat doesn't work because of the alcohol masking the flavor?
Oh gosh.
I told you, you get grilled tonight.
Yeah. Well, you probably saw me, if you were looking close, that 51% was just about my level. I can't go, well, to master flavor, you've got to go up a little bit more. But again, it depends on the whiskey. I mean, if it's a good whiskey, the flavor comes through. 55%, get up to 60. There's a lot of alcohol there. That would be my view.
Yeah. Anonymous asks, is the future of Scottish whiskey at risk because of the emergence of other countries like Japan, India, France?
Absolutely. The one lesson we always learn, you just can never be complacent. The industry's been through some ups and downs. It's had some tougher times and some better times. There's some brilliant whiskies being made in other places, and we've got to stay on our toes. Absolutely right. I worked for Jim Beam. I was selling bourbon for 7 years, and there are some awesome bourbon whiskies. One of my favorites was Maker's Mark. Knob Creek's really good, and whiskey drinkers are whiskey drinkers. So Scotch has got to hold on to its share of the market. It definitely has lost share recently, but I have a feeling it might be coming back a bit because I think there's a sort of new dawn, and there's a lot of new distilleries being built with some really entrepreneurial people who are making great whiskies, and there's I think a more of a response to where the consumer is wanting to go with whiskey. So yeah, we've got to stay on our toes.
Yeah, and related to that, MJ asks, which countries are starting to appreciate whiskey? and like any markets emerging and any countries becoming a manufacturing force in the future?
Yeah, gosh. When I was at Beam, I ran the emerging markets. So I was spending my time in South America, in India, Middle East, and Africa. And it was just fantastic to see a market like Brazil, booming with whiskey and blended Scotch whiskey. So, yeah, Brazil, I mean, Chile's doing really well. Mexico's been growing very fast. India, China. I mean, there is a correlation between GDP growth and Scotch whiskey consumption, because more or less Scotch is the sort of seen to be the aspirational, spirit, more so than I think, rum or vodka or gin or brandy. If you can put a good whiskey brand on the bar, you buy a round of drinks and it's I don't know, Blue Label or something, it's sort of a status thing. So GDP and Scotch whiskey growth go hand in hand, which is very encouraging for Scotch whiskey if they can maintain their market share. And those emerging markets are wonderful because I sat there on my first visit to Brazil and I poured myself a dram, and then somebody said, here's what you put into it. And I thought it was water, so I put a splash in, and then I went to drink, and it was coconut water.
Right. Wow.
An awful lot of whiskey is drunk with coconut water, and actually it was really good. It was teachers that I was having at the time, and teachers and coconut water, it's a great drink. So you learn, you don't rest on your laurels.
Amanda asks, I know this is a good question for maybe a lot of people having this conundrum. I know very little about whiskey, but want to buy a Christmas present for a whiskey lover. What would you recommend?
If they're a really true whiskey lover, and they probably will have experimented a lot, unless they're really anti peaty whiskey, almost anything, but I guess I'm going to steer you towards an independent bottling of something. There's so many good independent bottlers, and they tend to do something different, and you'll probably find something that your friend doesn't have if you go that route. Go into a specialist shop and say, look, what might he not have, or she might have had, and if you can surprise them, so much the better.
Great. Bob, I normally drink bourbon. What's a good whiskey to start with?
Oh, so you like bourbon, so you like the more sweet vanilla, flavored whiskies. Where would you start? You've got to, you could go for a Speyside with a little bit more character, something that's maybe a little bit more sherried. Go for a Highland whiskey. Go for a, go up to Highland Park. That's brilliant. Yeah, something with a bit of oomph to it. The lowland whiskies always used to be told to be very light. Some of them were triple distilled, a Rosebank or a Auchentoshan or Glenkinchie, but they've got flavour as well. But yeah, bourbon sweetness. Go for bourbon cask whiskey rather than sherry cask. I take back what I said earlier. Go and ask somebody if you can get a whiskey that's predominantly first fill bourbon. That might be your stepping stone into watch.
Got it. Paul loves your passion for whiskey. Please tell him why your whiskey is worth £35 a bottle when most malts and most blends are less expensive, particularly in the supermarket.
This is a tough thing. Look, we're a small business, and we basically do very, very we're meticulous about what we do and how we do it. The blend, the Trademark X blend, which I put together, has got 24-year-old whiskey in there. The Canvas and the Little Mill are 24 years old, and a lot of the others are pretty mature whiskey. So it's not a cheap whiskey to make. And we didn't want to cut corners. We didn't want to reduce the malt percentage. We wanted to do it as it was, and I wanted to get as close to that flavor and style of James Eady from 150 years ago. So that's a hard thing to do. And it's 45.6%. And don't forget the tax on a bottle of whiskey at 40% is about £8.50. So you go up a strength, we're over £9. Then there's the VAT. So the higher alcohol does make a big impact. And then when you compare it to a malt, well, why shouldn't a good blend be as expensive or more expensive than a single malt? Because that process has taken a lot more than bottling a single malt sometimes. And as I said, that the cask marrying process is time consuming and expensive. So yeah, it is expensive, but like a great wine, hopefully it's worth it.
Okay. Pauline, do you have a favorite naked wine with your background in wine?
Oh, I do. Oh, that's a real. Oh, I was hoping somebody wouldn't ask that question. Oh, it's Christian Patata Passimento. I just think fantastic. I know it ran out, and I'm on the list to get the next lot. I went to Puglia earlier. Well, actually, about 2 months ago. I had to go and taste some more wines. I mean, yeah, awesome wine.
Good, great one. And then last one, maybe from Darren. What's your view on the transparency movement in whiskey, providing detailed information for all the whiskies going to a blend? It's not a loaded question. He likes good blends. So
yeah, really, really interesting question. Thank you for answering that. Asking it. I'm all for transparency. You know, why not? I mean, the reason why the Scotch Whisky Association have rules and regulations is to try and keep a sort of level playing field. But you know, if you're prepared to name all the single malts and you know you're not going to upset anybody, then do it. You know, why not? It gets tricky if you're wanting to then say, if I want to put an age statement on Trademark X, you know, it has to be the youngest whiskey. So there'd be a 4-year-old, you know, whiskey. So it's a bit confusing because you can't then say the average is 6 or 8 or whatever it might be. So age statement's a tricky area, but yeah, I mean, I think it's lovely to be transparent. The reason most people aren't is because, you know, every blender reserves the right to change the blend in such a way that you and I will probably never notice. Because if you're blending 10, 15, 20, 30 whiskies and you take one out and replace it with something else, it'd be a real expert to work the difference. So yeah, I think transparency in everything. I mean, you know, any brand, you've got to be honest, you've got to have integrity, you've got to communicate with your consumer as closely as you can and just tell it as it is.
Okay, great. Well, listen, we've there's plenty of hardy souls still on, but we better wrap it up there. That's been fascinating, Rupert. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and thank you everyone for all your comments and chats. It's been a very engaged audience, Rupert. The whiskey crowd, absolutely. Sorry we didn't get to all your questions. As I say, Rupert, I'm sure you'll be up for answering more if you head onto the wall in the morning, and Rupert will get back to you. He's very passionate about, you know, answering each and every comment. Yeah, thank you for introducing us all to James Ely. I think it's awesome what you're doing, reviving the old family history, and lovely in a way. The original conversation with Rowan has come full circle, and now you're on selling your whiskey with us. And thanks to all the customers, angels watching tonight and participating in the vote and all your questions and engagement. And yeah, we've got some good data and kind of feedback to go out and work on, Rupert, in terms of planning some from next project. So definitely stay tuned, and we'll be in touch in due course about that.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming on. It's been really, really good fun. Learned a lot, and Eamon, thanks for giving us the chance.
Good stuff. All right, guys. All the best. Cheers.
Bye-bye.